Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. Well, hello, everyone. Today I am joined by a friend of mine, Pastor Jake Peterson from River City Church. We got to know each other, probably somewhere around 2008, I'm guessing, that ballpark.
That's probably right.
I was kind of entering college, and I started going to the church that you are still pastoring, River City, which was downtown Fargo. Same location. You guys haven't changed since I started going there.
Yes, that would have been maybe spring of 2010.
2010?
Probably.
Okay. That probably sounds about right.
Yeah.
So we've stayed in touch since then. I went to River City for a handful of years and kind of bounced around, ended up at other churches, but we'll still see each other around town. I mean, like,
grab a cup of coffee or chai now and again.
Yeah, for as big as Fargo is, you still randomly see people you know quite often.
For sure.
For those listening, I was just curious if you could give like a small bio about yourself, kind of who you are. They know you're a pastor, but
sure.
Any information to just kind of help form that context.
Yeah. It's always weird when someone's like, tell me about yourself. So normally I start with my family. So I've been married to my wife, Amy, for 21 years, just last August. And we have 5 kids. Our oldest is 17. She's a junior. And our son, Ben, is 15. He's all sportsing all the time. And then Nora is 12. And Lucy is 10, and Ruby is 8, but she'll be 9 here in a couple of months. So they keep us on our toes. 4 girls, 1 boy. We live up in North Fargo. And like you said, I've been a part of, helped plant River City in 2009, was a part of the team that helped plant River City downtown. When we first actually started to meet, we were meeting on Sunday nights now it's part of Dempsey's Pub downtown. They've blown the wall out, but it used to be a standalone little jazz club, and we started meeting in there on Sunday nights until literally we had a conversation with someone from the fire department that was like, yeah, you guys are kind of oversized in this room, so you probably got to figure something out. And then in the spring is when we moved to the location we're at now, and we've been there in some form since spring of 2010, which is where you came in. So, I was a part of the plant team for River City, and the goal of that, or the hope for that, was as downtown Fargo was kind of being revitalized, we wanted to see a church, gospel preaching, evangelical church, like back down in the heart of the city. And there's lots of great churches in Fargo-Moorhead. I have lots of good friendships and partnerships with lots of brothers and sisters all around the city, which is great. It's big, but it's also not too big. But we kind of want to see that downtown. So we were part of planting downtown, and been there ever since.
Yeah, and for those listening, Fargo City, where we live, they really revitalized the downtown, making it very, I don't know, hipster. I don't know.
Yeah, boutiques and restaurants with overpriced hamburgers and all that kind of stuff.
Lots of breweries and.
Yeah, we went from having like no breweries and tap houses to like 100 of them kind of thing in like 10 years. So, yeah. But yeah, that was all happening kind of on the front end of our desire to plant.
Right. And it's cool because River City is one of the only churches kind of in that locale. You're pretty much right on one of the...
Yeah, right on Main Avenue.
Yeah, so you are right there.
Yeah. It's and it's been good. I mean, you got to share challenges, and we can talk about some of those. But more often than not, when we've asked someone, how did you hear about River City? A visitor or someone who's coming, either a friend invited them, which is pretty common, or I've been driving by and I saw a bunch of people through these giant windows, and I thought, is that a church? And I decided one day to stop in. Like that, I've had that conversation on more than one occasion.
Yeah, that's
in the last
cool.
14 years. So.
What led you into kind of ministry, or like a first hook that got you in?
Yeah. I mean, if you really want to go far back, I was in high school And I was part of I don't know, just a small group of kind of like young men's discipleship. There's a guy at our church who kind of took young guys under his wing and encouraged them and kind of mentored them. And we studied the Bible. And he kind of first proposed the thought, like, hey, you ever thought about like ministry, like doing ministry pastorally or something like that? And I was like, no, I don't think so. I mean, that's cool and all, but not really my jam. Came up to Fargo-Moorhead for school. Thought I was going to go into education. Got involved at a church up here, Bethel Church. They had a vibrant youth ministry and a vibrant college ministry, and I had a friend invite me and got involved. Not only just as a college student in what they were doing, but one of the youth leaders was like, hey, you ever want to hang out with middle schoolers? And I was like, I suppose. And so for like multiple years, I served as like a volunteer 7th grade, small group leader kind of thing. I did come to realize I love middle schoolers because Jesus loves them, but it's not really my my jam. But I saw firsthand discipleship, encouraging people to grow in their love for Jesus and to use their gifts. And I was like, this is really great. And it was there that a couple of the guys who were in leadership there kind of put their arm around me a little bit and gave me a spot at the table to learn and grow on the job. And sort of, as a volunteer, and then as opportunities became available, hey, would you want to step into this? Would you help lead music for our youth program? Would you want to help do some stuff with our college students? And that continued to kind of stir that desire over those first couple of years of when I was here in college. And I was like, maybe there's something here all along that I was kind of not thinking about until I was. And then as the opportunities, the doors opened, if I can say it that way, I was like, yeah, I think these doors are opening for a reason. And so I just continued to kind of go through them and got more and more opportunities to do ministry work until 2009 when I had a connection and it was like, hey, we'd like to plant a church in downtown Fargo. Do you want to be a part of that? And my answer was, I got to pray about that, but yes. Yes, I do.
Yeah, because I knew you first as the kind of main worship leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we launched, that was my role. I was absolutely like number 2 guy. We had a lead pastor, and I was the also, which is great. It was a really great team. There were about 7 families when we launched River City, and my family was part of that. And I was happy to use some of my gifts and help lead music and help with some of the administrative components, and we kind of just launched. And we had some like seed funds and some horsepower, like people horsepower right from the beginning. So it allowed us to like hit the ground running. And so for almost 10 years, that was my primary role, mostly leading worship and some of that like administrative stuff,
right,
which was great. And we grew, and people came to know Jesus, and we baptized them, and sent out community group leaders, and church, sent out a church plant, and so all the stuff that kind of happened in that window, which is phenomenal.
Yeah. So you said 7 families.
7 families helped start River City.
So man, what's that like? So, like feeling like God's calling you to something.
Yeah.
But you don't have this massive. It's not like you're Moses leading the whole of Israel out of Egypt.
Right. We don't have an army behind us. We have. Yeah. I mean, it's like not that we can see, at least. Yeah.
It's, probably more akin to like Jesus with his just 12 followers, where it's like we're trying to start something different here with just this small group of people. Was there a lot of like fear, or what were some of the emotions kind of in that? Because myself, I'm someone who loves, I have my list. You can see on my table, I have tons of like lists and stuff, planning, prepping. So the idea of just venturing off into the unknown with just a few people sounds terrifying to me.
It is a little terrifying. It was a little terrifying. In fact, I remember. So I had lunch with Brett, the guy who was being assessed to be the lead, and he had asked me, I'd love to partner with you on this. I'd love to have you part of the team. We have enough funding for us to maybe even have multiple staff, which is what we were kind of aiming at, that both of us would be working on this full-time, although underpaid, but full-time. Plus, we have these families. There were a couple families from the church he was coming from. I had a family from the church from Bethel, where I was at, who was kind of catching this vision for a church plant and was like, we're in. So there were 7 families, and we knew like, oh, we have a budget for a year or two. If at this current, like we can kind of map it out based on what we hoped we all could contribute. And like we all said, well, what could you contribute, But that was it. And so I went home after having lunch about first sitting down to, is this a possibility? And I remember Amy, my wife, going, what now? What is this? Like she didn't have a concept for a church plant. I had been reading about it and thinking about it for a year and a half, 2 years. Didn't see a path yet for that, kind of in the Fargo-Moorhead area. Wasn't sure if I was like the solo guy to do that. And so it was like I had the framework for it, but I didn't see what it was going to look like. So then it was in front of me, and I was like, well, this looks like it would work. And like you said, I'm not sure exactly how this is going to go. One of the things that was an anchor, and I don't mean just to be like churchy, but Psalm 127, unless the Lord builds the house, those who labor in vain. And so the conviction, and really what kind of anchored me, even though there was a whole lot of unknown. I have a stable job. I was working at Bethel at the time, and so I was working with their college students and their youth, and I had something stable, and it had actually paid money, things like that. Right. To this, we're like, well, we think we can pay some money. But the conviction really was, well, if God's doing this, then he'll provide. And let's just see where it goes. That kind of was how it was. And I think what was helpful in that, both from the kind of the sending church, Metropolitan was the sending church, and they had some financial support that went along with that. And even Bethel, when they kind of commissioned me out, supported me through that summer, allowed me to kind of stay on through the summer while working on the church plan until the fall when we launched. And so there was a lot of support in prayer and some financial, but just like organizationally, I had a dozen conversations with some of the guys, seasoned pastors at Bethel, to say, okay, I got a question about this before we ever got started. And they were like, yeah, I'd love to talk to you about, here's some things I've learned in 30 years of ministry, or those sorts of things, which I think helped kind of counter the, we don't know what the heck's going to happen. And then we launched in the fall, and like people showed up, and people started, serving. Like, oh, I'll volunteer to help watch the little kids down in the little basement office / nursery / until we got stuff kind of off the ground. But
cool, that's really interesting to know. I love kind of the connection with that verse of like having that faith or confidence that, if this isn't from God, we might just fall on our face, and that's okay.
That's okay.
And I think that's a really important thing for, I think, a lot of people to hear, that sometimes I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I get the sense of like, well, I need to make this work. Like, whether it's from God or not, I need to make this work. But having that confidence that it's okay to fall on your face, especially if it's like, if this isn't like, sometimes that's how we learn that God's not leading us down a certain path. Preferably like, in context of like not making a really stupid decision or something.
Yeah, there's something to be said for like being wise and being sensitive to the leading of the Holy Spirit and walking appropriately. I don't know if that's the right word. One of my early mentors, one of these guys who the guy who kind of mentored this group of young men way back when I was in high school, who first kind of floated the idea of like, you ever thought about ministry? Said something one time, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I'm not going to get it quote word for word, but along the lines of like, in the kingdom of God, there's no such thing as failure. And what he meant by that was not that we can't fail, and not that we can't screw up, and not that we can't sin, and not that we can absolutely do all those things, but essentially reminding, like that kind of came to mind, that the Lord seems to be leading this way. And even if this thing doesn't last, and that doesn't mean it wasn't necessarily a failure in the eyes of God. If his hand is in this, even if it falls on its face, there's still something for us to, he's growing us. There's something for us to learn in this. He might have a purpose.
Yeah. And you never know if there's like a certain random person that if you hadn't done something,
Yeah.
That God was like, I need you to do this, even though it's maybe not going to work out how you think it will, so that you connect with this person who connects with this person. Kind of like an It's a Wonderful Life moment. I think we're all going to have those big It's a Wonderful Life moments in heaven where God's like, hey, guess what? Because you did this.
Yeah, that conversation you had that you thought was a total flop actually was a seed that stuck in this person's mind for a decade. And then later, someone else had a conversation. Yeah.
It's going to be that like conspiratorial web of like connections.
The guy with the red string.
Like, that guy's going to be Jesus and be like, because you did this.
Yeah. Because you fell on your face over here.
I can't wait for that moment. That'll be so cool.
And I think you're absolutely right. And so I think that idea or that scripture, that reality that, Jesus says it later. He says, I'm going to build my church. And he's talking to Peter, right? Who do you say that I am? That whole thing. I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell aren't going to stand against it. This idea, like Jesus is going to build his church. Psalm 127. If the Lord's building his house, he's going to build it.
Right.
So it's not up to us to. It's not incumbent upon us to build it in the way we think, and at the same time, he's going to do it. And so, where's he leading? What is he doing? How do we walk faithfully? And how do we walk by faith even when we can't see it? How do we fail faithfully? Like, it's a whole nother, thing. But he's doing what he's going to do. And because we're finite, we can't always see exactly what that's going to look like, good or bad.
Yeah. And where I would love to just kind of go year by year and say, how did River City develop? I think what's maybe more interesting to me right now is just the idea of your location, your downtown. I think one year we were, like, Fargo was voted one of the drunkest cities because we have 6 to 8 months of winter some years. And
some universities and a bunch of dive bars and liquor store in every corner. I mean, there's a lot of it.
Yeah. Are there things that God has brought to your attention or that God has taught you about how God's working today kind of through your experience of your location?
Yeah. Well, like on a practical note, we've been doing some construction work in the building to make our space a little more usable. And so for the last, 4 or 5 months, one of the doors has pretty much been open all during working hours because contractors are in and out. Was it last week or the week before? One of the guys working on the building comes upstairs because now we're upstairs and we have some offices. It's great. Next time you come by, we'll give you the tour.
All right.
But one of the guys comes upstairs and says, hey, there's a couple of people and they're downstairs in one of the bathrooms. 3 people are in the family bathroom. So maybe you want to come check that out. And we were all upstairs. We're like, okay. We went down and it was some folks who were homeless. I got to chat with one of the guys for a little bit and they're kind of making the rounds and it had gotten really cold here. It's really cold here right now. And so they're kind of moving from place to place, trying not to use up all their... You only have a certain amount of days in some of these shelters that you can stay at per year. And so they're trying not to use those days. And so one of the gals was in our building kind of cleaning herself off, sponge bathing her face and neck and whatever in the family bathroom. And so we were like, okay, we want to help you. How can we help you? Where can we point you to where you might need assistance? That was kind of an extreme case because they were there for a couple hours and we're trying to talk to them, figure out what they need. And there were many issues going on there with them that were contributing to probably where they're at. Multiple times each month, we'll have folks coming in with various needs, whether it's they just want a cup of coffee, or they're asking for assistance, or in this case, they just kind of wander in like, hey, here's a warm spot I can be for a while. And it's just the reality of downtown. Like you said, we're a few blocks from the library. We're a block from the bus station, so lots of public transit to and from there. The high rise, which just got demoed, which was all low-income housing. We used to have a lot more traffic for that. But, Salvation Army is on the other side of Broadway, on the other side of downtown, just to the north. So there's just, that's where we're at. One, I think it's given all of our folks, our staff in particular, who's there all the time, and then folks who come downtown, just a reminder of like, oh, this is reality. I've always joked that Fargo is kind of a big suburb. Fargo-Moorhead is kind of one giant suburb.
Kind of makes sense.
It doesn't really have a huge urban center. I mean, the downtown area is our urban center, but it's a square mile. It's not like this sprawling urban downtown. And yet, there are pockets of Fargo-Moorhead where financial need or homelessness kind of are bigger. Downtown is one of them. Sometimes you see a little bit around the mall or other parts of
right.
kind of North Moorhead up near the like where the county offices are and the federal building. Like there's some needs there. Like it's just reality. So partly it's just seeing the reality of need that we see downtown. The other part is it's been a challenge to figure out is like what's our role in meeting that need? Because we'll have folks come in for practical things, and some of that we can help with, whether it's food or gift cards for gas or groceries, or like we have no problem doing what we can to help meet a practical need. But then other needs too, where people will come in and say, I'm trying to get to Bismarck. Can you help me with that? Well, maybe. So we've been able to help, get you can get a bus ticket right there at the bus station and try to get people where they need to get. But the reality is we're also not equipped to house people.
Right.
We don't have the structure, the social service structure to help with rent assistance on a regular basis or whatever. So it's also been helpful for us to be able to connect with who are the people in the organizations, whether they're government or nonprofits that are doing those things, that we can say hey, we're not best equipped to help you with that, but did you know the county has this? And so can we connect you with the person, or can we connect you with the social worker? So building those relationships with other folks who are meeting other kinds of needs has been good and helpful. And that is received, it's probably about 50-50. Some of that's received good, oh, thanks. I didn't know that. Other people oh, I've been there. I want you guys to help me. And so anyway, that's just one of those practical things.
Yeah.
Being downtown is there's just a lot more of that foot traffic, and you just see some of those tangible needs that if you're, the southwest part of town where everything's a little more, if I can say it this way, a little more polished, you just don't.
Right.
You don't have that foot traffic there because Costco doesn't have sidewalks, just giant parking lot. I love Costco, by the way. But
Yeah. No, I mean, what you were saying, that sounds interesting about how because of your location, you see a different type of need.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that need, and that you don't have, River City doesn't have $1 billion to just help people, you've had to connect with other people who can help. And my mind immediately went to the verses about body of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
how we all have different roles.
Sure.
And it's oh man, you guys are kind of, because of your location, forced to experience that kind of in a new way.
Well, and you're absolutely right. We want to have compassion and try to meet practical needs wherever we can. And sometimes it's literally as simple, especially in the summer. Sometimes it's literally as simple as a bottle of water and some a granola bar. We'll keep some of those things on hand. In the winter, we make sure to try to brew our coffee early, and not just because coffee, we want to be hip and serve coffee. That's not it. Really, one, I think we probably do, as I sip my coffee here at your table. Maybe we all have a problem culturally. I don't know, but
we do have 8 months of winter.
It's true. We do. It's really cold here. But people will. It happened 2 weeks ago. Someone came in early. It was probably around 8:15. The gal who started making coffee that morning had already begun to make coffee for the morning, and it was still brewing. And this guy comes in and she goes, "Hey, I'm brewing coffee. I have a cup in just a minute." And he's like, "Okay." And he waited, and I've seen him at River City a few times. When the coffee was ready, I said, "Hey, I think this first pot is done." And he came over and got a cup, and he's not a regular attender. He's not connected really in any way, but he's like, "Hey, those guys have a warm place and a cup of coffee." And I was able to chat with him for a bit, and someone else who showed up, who's just really good at connecting with people, slid in and was like, "Hey, nice to meet you. I'm so-and-so." And just started asking him questions, which maybe made him a little uncomfortable. I don't know, but that's a pretty regular occurrence just because of where we're at.
Well, you just said that's just where we're at. And a lot of, we're all in different places. We have different circles. We have different jobs in our life. Sometimes I think there are probably those people that we'll come into contact with because of just where we're at.
Yeah.
And how River City can provide that need of a warm cup of coffee, a warm place to get out of the cold for a couple minutes. I think there are probably other areas that each of us can provide people in our life with. I mean, I've made reference to this before on this podcast, but we're sitting in a room surrounded by board games. I've had the opportunity to make friendships with people because of that.
Sure.
And usually, almost never do I think of that as a spiritual thing. But maybe I should. Maybe I should be like, well, I'm at a place where I have lots of friends who have board games and we really like playing them. And I mean, culturally, we're actually kind of in a board game renaissance.
Yeah.
And that might be a really great way to connect with some new people, some non-believers.
I have a friend, or you got a friend who, you guys, we have this shared or this shared hobby or something, like, let's hang out, and a friendship might form. What God might be doing in that kind of question. Yeah, for sure. One of the things that we really wrestled with over the last couple of years, so just a little background, so we've been in that facility, in that building since 2010. I think we moved in. On the main floor, we just rented it. And every year when we would like do our little lease with them, or kind of review it, it was for a couple of years at a time, and then we started reviewing it year to year. And we'd ask the question like, hey, if you guys ever sell this building, let us know. And they were always like, that's never going to happen. Fast forward, I think 2014, I think, the business, or the family business that owned the whole block of buildings came to us when we were looking at our annual renewal for lease. And they were like, we're thinking about selling some properties. We might sell this one. Would you guys still be interested in purchasing it? And we're like, well, that's an answer to prayer, because we've been asking you and praying about it for like 4 years. But yes, we're interested. So at that moment, we had a decision to make. Like, do we want to spend a bunch of money on this building downtown? We don't have our own parking lot. It's landlocked because there's literally like 4th Street, Main Avenue, the railroad, and they're unyielding. If you're any familiar with railroads, they have like 100-year contracts with most of the cities that they work in, so that they get to use that. And then the building next to us is literally touching. So like this is it. But that same question of like, but we don't want to give up the place. Like there's something to it. It's not convenient. It's not parking lot. So it's not family friendly in that regard. Like we don't have an elevator in the building, even with our renovation. We're not required because the building's old, but it's in the future. We're going to work on that. But it has its limitations. And yet the benefits of place for the sake of mission outweigh the inconveniences. So we said, yes, let's buy the building. We had the same kind of question a couple years ago now, as we're like, hey, we're busting at the seams, especially for like kid space, things like that. Do we renovate the upstairs? Do we raise a bunch of money and renovate the upstairs? Or do we save that money and try to like find another place? And our conviction on our team was like, no. I mean, if we could find another place, maybe in the downtown corridor, that's one thing.
Right.
Because we don't want to lose that. But there's nothing, I mean, it doesn't help that like the downtown has been revitalized in that regard. Everything's really expensive. So we were like, actually, no, it's worth it. And so we decided, nope, we made the conscious decision again. We're going to stay. We're going to invest in this space and stay in this space for the sake of, we want our mission to look a certain way.
Yeah.
And with that idea of place in mind, or not just place for place sake, but like, what are the things that are important to us, or that are bridges to ministry? It made way more sense to stay. So not unlike like, hey, what are the things that are in my life that I'm connected with, or the people I'm connected with, and how God might be using those things to reach other people. And we don't often think about it that way. Even a big building, we're like, well, we don't have a parking lot. No, but we have 2 lots just to the north of us that belong to the city that are open on evenings and weekends for free. So we have 2 massive city lots that are free. We don't have to plow them. The city does that. We don't have to maintain them. The city does that. Now, if they decide to sell those lots and put buildings there, we might be in a hurt bag. But until that day, we're okay.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that you're, even after over a decade in your building, you're still making that conscious decision of, there might be some inconveniences here, but you feel this is where God has placed you and called you, and you see his work in this location, so you stick with it. Yeah.
Well, because we don't know, and I think that's the part for me, just as part of this conversation, that is helpful. We can plan, we can have ideas, and we should, right? We can plan and make lists and kind of set up how do we want to get here and try to steward our time and our resources to meet those goals, like that's all great. I'm all for it. But at the end of the day, we don't fully know exactly what God is up to or what he might want to do. Kind of getting back to the beginning of our conversation a little bit.
Yeah.
So how might he want to use, this basement and the group of friends you have to encourage you and grow you, let alone build some relationships with other people or invite them into your world or show some level of hospitality for someone else who's like, I don't have a lot of friends and you guys are pretty great. Here's, opportunity for you to go, yeah, welcome. And they also then get to see and maybe hear from you. Here's why this is important to me, or here's what shapes us as, a group of roommates or a group of friends. And where faith then comes into play of like, we've all been shaped by this person named Jesus. Here's what that looks like then. Or who knows what.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and we all have those areas that we maybe some of us wouldn't necessarily use the language of I feel called, but maybe you are called there, where it's like, I have interests in board games, lots of nerdy stuff. I dress up and I go to the Renaissance Fair.
Nerds for Jesus, man.
Yeah. But it's like,
yeah,
how many more people, or I have a very unique subset of the population that I can interact with because of my interests.
Absolutely.
Because of your passion for downtown, you have that unique subset of the population that you get to interact with. And we don't all have the same areas that we're passionate about or called to, because we're all just, we only have one life to live here.
Yeah, right.
And we ultimately don't get enough time to interact with everyone we'd like to interact with.
And to get to that, what you were saying earlier about like the body of Christ is broad and we have different parts. And some of that means like different giftedness, right? Not everyone's a mouth, not everyone's a hand, not everyone's an eye. That's all true. But we talk about it a lot at River City. I mean, it comes out in a lot of our application, if I can say it that way. Well, where has God planted you? Where do you live and work? And what is your family like? And what is your neighborhood like? And who are your coworkers? Where has God put you? And what is he calling you to there? And it's not all like, I'll say it this way. It's not all, from our perspective, like extraordinary ministry work. And you can't see air quotes, but that's what I'm using. It's ordinary. And yet God uses that ordinary. That's his primary mode of working, is in the ordinary, everyday lives of his people, following him and like reaching out and inviting others into that. And it's so much of it is just ordinary. And so like where he's planted you, where you work, who you live with and around, the things you do, the things that you enjoy. God intentionally, I believe God intentionally has placed you there. And you might, like you said, you might not see it as ministry or as calling, but God knows what he's doing. And so clearly he's building something on purpose. He doesn't do it like by accident.
Right. And it's crazy just like thinking about my own life, where I attended River City and I've been so blessed by the relationships that I made there. It was such a good church to go to at that time in my life when I was dealing with the things I was dealing with. And I have like stories that because of the relationships I built through River City, I mean, I'll quickly share one. I met a friend of mine who knows about cars. I don't know. I know how to drive a car.
Yeah.
And one time I was driving way, way South Fargo. So like 10 miles away from where I normally go. And my car just dies. Like while I'm pulling off the interstate, it just dies. And I am able to weasel my way to like a Walmart parking lot. And I'm like, oh gosh, I guess I'll call this guy. I know he lives on the absolute opposite side of town, but he's the only person I know. So I give him a call and he's like, oh my goodness, I'm literally like 5 minutes away from you. We're like randomly visiting some friends in South Fargo. So he was able to get over after he dropped his family off and help me get my car to my mechanic.
That's great.
And it was just like, so we're both in like South Fargo, a place that neither of us ever go. And we just happen to be there the exact same afternoon.
Love it.
It's like, that's kind of wild.
Yeah. I think there's a quote by Pastor John Piper, where he says, God's always doing 10,000 things and you're aware of 3 of them, kind of thing. I
Yeah.
might be paraphrasing. But that idea that, like, God's at work, he's advancing his kingdom, he's building his church, all that's happening, and we often we get glimpses of it, right? But even like to be able to acknowledge something like that, like, here's a way that God provided for you in what we would kind of say is like, well, that's kind of a bizarre, weird, fortunate, however you'd classify it. But we have like something we can point to be like, well, God didn't necessarily bring you to River City, 10 years ago for the purpose of getting your car looked at, whatever. Like, we don't draw those kinds of necessarily straight lines, but we can absolutely trace that little red thread to go, here's a way God was providing for a need here that I had no idea that would ever be a thing. But now I have this friend who's generous and willing to help me out and can be of assistance. And what a kindness of God to do this.
Yeah, I view him as like all the best authors, like fiction authors, like weave together like a dozen plot threads.
Right.
I'm just like, how much more? How much more can God be?
Yeah, you pull on that string and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, it's amazing. Just talking about stories, there's a gal who's an exchange student here in Fargo-Moorhead who got invited by another exchange student to come they were going to like a Bible study on campus, which is primarily international students. But the one who invited them has been connected at River City for about a year and a half. So this gal was being encouraged to come and grew up in Asia to parents who were separated. One parent was a Christian, another parent was not, and so there was just division there. And she was living with the non-Christian parent, and she came here for school, was invested in and encouraged by a friend, comes to faith in Jesus, and just recently gets baptized at River City. And I just kind of marvel at, as she shared her story and the church kind of celebrated with her, like God was at work in her family back home, even though that was a pretty broken situation, and she grieved some of that, through coming to Fargo-Moorhead, of all places.
It's such a weird place to pick.
Exactly. For school, there was a program that just happened to be a good fit for her across the globe. And here she runs into or gets connected with, randomly, again, air quotes, someone who loves Jesus, and they share some cultural affinity and build a relationship. And then she's being baptized in front of a church full of people. Like, again, pull on that thread. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Unless Psalm 127 is true, that God's building his house. So we can labor, and we don't have to labor in vain. So we just keep doing what God's called us to do and trust that he's going to build his house. Even though if we don't fully understand what all that looks like or where it's all going to go, or if it doesn't look the way, like you said at the beginning, it doesn't look the way like we think it necessarily should or would.
Good reminders.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anywhere people can find River City online.
Yeah, rivercityfargo.org. We have information about who we are. We got links to our kind of our sermon audio. That's all podcastable. You look for the little red square with the white drop or whatever on your podcast search if you want to check us out. That's all there, as well as links to, like, if you're from the area and community groups and all that stuff we're doing, that's all there. So rivercityfargo.org. There's the plug.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake.
Yep. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.